Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators out there and channel members. We have a returning guest here today with us, author, lecturer, and researcher Chris Aubeck, here to have an amazing discussion about flying saucers myth, because it is a myth. They never were flying saucers. But before I bring Chris on with his amazing research, a quick reminder, super chats and super stickers are available and will be read out live during the show. If you have any questions or comments that you would like addressed by me or my guest, that's the best way to get them answered. So send in those super chats, baby. And a shout out to Russian X-Files fan 87 for the contributions on Buy Me a Coffee. And they left an amazing note along with the contribution, which makes it all worth doing this kind of work. So thank you very much, X-Files fan 87. Really appreciate it. Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal links are also in the description and are a great way to help support the show and my work. And also Ryder Ranger channel memberships are available and are a fantastic way to help support the show monthly for less than a cup of coffee a month. And if you become a Ryder Ranger channel member, you get access to bonus episodes. But if you would like to contribute but can't, because we all know how tough things are out there, you can always share the video out, hit the thumbs up button, or leave a comment. Hitting the thumbs up button really does help out the channel, and leaving a comment helps boost engagement, even if it's just emojis. Just flood the comment section with emojis. So please drop a comment if you wish. Thank you guys very much. So with that down, a warm welcome back to the show, author, lecturer, and researcher, Mr. Chris Aubeck. It's good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing okay. Here in Spain, it's pretty warm, despite the time of day.
Yeah, how's it going in Spain, my friend? You guys staying away from the rest of the world's problems, or what?
Yeah, I suppose so. I imagine we're ready to make our own and share them. But no, at the moment, everything's going very well. There's not much COVID. No one's too worried about nuclear weapons hitting us at the moment. I suppose the next big thing is going to be AI. That'll be a big threat. But apart from that, no one's too worried here. And that's why people come to retire in Spain.
Well, I'm glad that everything is good over there. So, since the last time you were on, I started this series called Delusions of Ufology, which I'm going to get back up on that at some point here. I'm just really busy at the moment, and those shows take up a lot of energy. But I've been trying to tell everyone about your book, Saucers, because the research in your book is really unbelievable. You really do a great job researching into Kenneth Arnold and the UFO sightings, even before Kenneth Arnold, and the entire flying saucer narrative. And I don't have a copy here with me because I recently moved, but it should be widely popular, and you should have sold thousands of copies of this book. It should be a #1 bestseller, just to the high volume of research that's gone into it. But with that being said, which I'm going to actually bring up the Amazon, people can get it on Amazon. Is there any other place that people can get it? Oh, well, it's not coming up.
It's on Amazon. I'm going to publish all my books through Amazon. Basically because it gives me a higher level of control over the books that I publish. I can make corrections, or I can do whatever I want. And as you know, this book is it's got like 500 images in it. It's incredibly well illustrated, and in ways that people haven't seen before, I think, in a UFO book. I was quite creative in what I did here, and that's worked really well. There's a review coming out by David Clark, the folklore ufologist, who's given me a 5-star review. He said it's coming out in 14 times. And yeah, I mean, people are still expressing an interest. The problem is, I suppose, that it's a lot of people are going to think it's a niche subject, and that might be because of the way that I wrote the search for the origin of discoidal UFOs. on the cover, but the fact is, I just wanted to be completely honest. That's what it is. I wanted to do the first ever real, proper, well done look into where we got the image of saucer-shaped UFOs from. And the Oxford English Dictionary contacted me. They want to amend their entry on the etymology of the word flying saucer based on my book, and it's it hasn't sold thousands, but it's there, and it'll be there forever. And I might make some kind of amendment to it, but I think that it's someone had to come out and say where the flying saucer imagery came from, and that was me.
Well, I am trying to echo everything that you talk about in your book, and I always try and shout you out whenever I talk about it or talk about it on other people's shows. But with that being said, do you think that people really want to know the truth when it comes to the flying saucer and the UFO narrative? Because I really don't think that they do, Chris. And I think that that's a really big issue within ufology.
The problem with so on the one hand, I'm not going to deny that UFOs exist in the sense that I saw one. That doesn't mean that I believe it was inhabited by little aliens who want to eat me for breakfast or anything like that. So, I mean, the concept of unidentified flying objects exists. It's the disc-shaped ones that people are really attached to, because we're talking about at least 4 generations of people who've grown up associating flying saucepan-lid objects to UFOs, with aliens and extraterrestrials. People who probably drew them at school, who, if ever a UFO's appeared in Scooby-Doo, it'll have been a saucer-shaped one. And then you have like family members who, from the 1970s or 80s, they'll say, "Well, yeah, I saw a flying saucer." And to deny the possibility that saucer-shaped objects exist also means that it feels like you're maybe calling Uncle Tim a liar or whatever, in your family. So, I mean, people have sentimental attachments to the disc shape. Although, as I show very early on in the book, it's such a tiny fraction of UFOs that are saucer-shaped that attachment that we have to them is not justified at all. As I show in the book, when I was working with Jacques Vallée years ago, well, 14, 15 years ago now, on Wonders in the Sky. Basically, I mean, whatever you think of that book, whatever anyone thinks of that book, if it was good or garbage or whatever, the fact is we went through every source that we could find, and we couldn't find saucer-shaped UFOs. I mean, we just couldn't find any cases that were authentic. I came to the conclusion that less than 1% of UFOs seen before Kenneth Arnold, that is the 24th of June, 1947, were disc-shaped, less than 1%. And since the 1980s, 1990s, only about 5% or less are disc-shaped again. And what that means is that it was only around 50 years in which disc-shaped, saucer-shaped objects were seen or allegedly seen by people, which is somewhere like the career of the Rolling Stones, I imagine. It's a very short period of time in human history. So I think that being so attached to the flying saucer is not very justified.
Well, here's the thing. If people discover what a really good researcher such as yourself or others have discovered, such as myself, there wouldn't be a community. And I guess that is what this ufology really is like an industry, right? It's a money-making industry. And guess what happens when people find out really what's going on? That means that there's no more money. And it's simple, really. But besides that, I think that that's really what's going on. People don't really want the truth behind what's happening with flying saucers and UFOs because it completely wrecks and destroys their industry. I mean, even in the thumbnail of this video, I have the saucer shaped UFOs in the background. Every conference uses a saucer shaped UFO. Anybody that wants to describe, like you're talking about drawing, they're going to use a disc shaped UFO to describe the
need
phenomenon.
one on the front of any book I publish on this subject, so people know what we're talking about. And what I say in the book is that we relate the disc to UFOs in the same way that people associate ghosts wearing white sheets with ghosts. If you want to draw a ghost so that anyone from a small child to an old grandmother knows what it is instantly, you need to draw it with a sheet and big black eyes, and they'll say ghost. Otherwise, it could be anything. It could be a vampire. It could be your neighbor. And this is what's happened with UFOs. Whatever you do, you need to continue. You have to perpetuate the idea that UFOs are disc-shaped, or otherwise people are just not going to understand what you're talking about. So yeah, that's how it works.
That is exactly how it works. Now, if people don't know what we're talking about, I'm sure people definitely do because I've done quite a few shows on it. But let's get into, let's touch on Kenneth Arnold really quickly, and then I want to get into a few other things. Did you have communication at all with his family during the writing of this book, like surviving family members?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I thought it was the best thing to do because I was writing about, in a sort of living legend a dead legend, but certainly one that lives on in popular culture. And he has family, surviving members. His daughter Kim, for example, was very helpful while I was doing the research on the book. Any questions that came up, I could send her an email. And that was good. And I also spoke to Kenneth Arnold's granddaughter, Chanel, and that was very nice too. So it's very interesting how Arnold's memory of Arnold has impacted that family, because I mean, Chanel has a tattoo with the date and everything on her body. Kim lives and breathes her father's memory. It's something that's affected a family, and then of course everyone around that family. If it hadn't been for Arnold, much of what we associate with extraterrestrials wouldn't exist these days. So yeah, I had contact with them. I would have liked to have done something bigger with Kim, with Kenneth Arnold's daughter, but she was a little bit suspicious of cooperating with anyone living outside the United States, even the state, I believe. So in the end, I was planning on helping her write a book, a definitive book on this subject, because she's never done it. But in the end, it fell through. But that's fine. I mean, I understand people are probably quite suspicious of, I have no economic interest in that at all. I have no financial motivation, but she felt that maybe I would, because most people who've approached the family in the past have had a financial interest in the story. They've stolen things and taken photographs that they shouldn't have. I wanted to respect them as much as possible.
How did they feel about your book? And I'm sure they read it, right? What did they think of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sent a copy to each of them. Kim really liked it. She didn't tell me directly. Her daughter did. And Chanel, the granddaughter, she really liked it too. You can see her in a Facebook post with the book in her hand. They both liked it. And I'm pretty sure that it's something that they will be able to use as reference in the future, because there are a lot of details in it that they didn't know themselves. I managed to work out the dates and locations of maybe all of Kenneth Arnold's other sightings. There are probably about 9 altogether. And even the fact that Arnold's wife, Doris, also saw, theoretically at least, a flying saucer, and that was mentioned in newspapers. The family didn't know that either. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that they'll remember this book and they'll refer back to it quite a lot. And as I said, I do speak respectfully of Kenneth Arnold, because I think that he was an honest man. He might have been a little bit confused towards the end, but he honestly reported what he saw.
I think he definitely got confused, and I think that it became such a frenzy topic, and everybody else just relating their experiences on top of his, and then it turned into something that it was never supposed to be from the very beginning. And how did they deal with the misnomer of Kenneth Arnold never saying that the shape of the craft was saucer in shape? It flew like saucers skipping across water.
Yeah, this was an important part of my book, because what I show is, and this is the main thesis, that the expression flying saucer was already in common use in June 1947, and before that it had been in common use for about 60 years. And I go into great detail in the book about how that came about, and the importance of that, its contribution to the spreading of the myth of flying saucers. And they were very surprised. They told me that Kenneth had gone to the grave believing that he had accidentally created the term flying saucer. He wasn't sure how. He himself believed that he must have said it in one of the initial interviews, and that it had been misinterpreted. In reality, that's not what happened at all. And that's something that I show in the book. I sort of hope that at some point somebody who edits Wikipedia will take this into account, because it still hasn't been corrected anywhere. He didn't invent the term. It was already in existence. And because it was already in existence, journalists everywhere invented it independently.
Yeah, it was flying saucers was a sport of trap shooting. It predated Arnold sightings over 60 years.
That's right. Yeah, it was around 1880, 1881 that a guy called George Legowski invented a clay disc used in trap shooting. The reason he invented it was because live bird shooting had been forbidden about a decade before that. The people started using glass balls that shattered in the air, but of course there were lots of environmental problems related to that. So he invented a non-hazardous solution, the disc, and almost immediately people began calling it a flying saucer, quite logically, because it was saucer-shaped and it flew. It wasn't the only term they gave it, but it was one of the most popular ones. So if you look back, anyone can do it. Go back into the newspaper archives of the 1880s, 1890s, and so on, and discover that people were talking about flying saucers. The first time you see it, it's quite shocking to hear of sportsmen trying to fire at flying saucers and finding it difficult. And then what happened was that in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, the sport of trap shooting was incredibly popular. It was one of the most popular sports in the whole of the United States, but this is a fact that had been forgotten by the 1950s and 60s. And the reason why it was abandoned was that well, during the war or the wars, the government and the military demanded that any bullets and weapons be sent to the war effort instead of being used or wasted on leisure activities. So trap shooting was de-emphasized. But then the interesting thing is that in 1944, when America and the other countries were training their gunners to fight against the Nazis, they began using the clay discs invented by George Legowski to train their pilots to shoot enemy aircraft. So an interesting situation comes about in which 4 years before Arnold, people were talking in the newspapers about flying saucers being used for training purposes and how their gunners were firing at flying saucers. I mean, this was in the newspapers. Another interesting thing was that, just a coincidence, but the man associated with all of this was a man called General Arnold. And so people associated the name Arnold with flying saucers in the mid-1940s. And then suddenly in 1947, it was a completely different Arnold and a completely different kind of flying saucer. But it's a very obvious evolution, a very simple development that happened. And it really did have a massive impact on ufology, because people immediately associated what Arnold said he'd seen with flying saucers, and the word spread. That's how it happened.
Could you mute your notifications on your computer really quickly?
Yeah. I got the students who are writing and sending me their homework. Let's see if
if you could just mute that really quickly. So we have clay pigeons being called flying saucers since 1880. Hundreds of thousands of people being familiar with the term. The military adopting the term. The general that was in charge was named Arnold. They basically take the practice of trap shooting in the early 40s during World War II. 2 years after the war ended, we get the term flying saucers, but in a different context. This is all laid out in great detail in your book, Saucers. And really what we have here, Chris, is that the entire subject of ufology, it has been based on this flying saucer narrative. And ufology has been using the shape of a round disc when it was never described by Arnold as a flying saucer. So we've literally had the shape wrong this entire time for what would it be, like 77 years now? We've essentially been telling and regurgitating a misrepresentation of what Arnold said that he saw. And out of Arnold's own words, which is in your book as well, and he makes comments of what others claim to have saw at that time wasn't the same, or it was pretty much nothing at all.
Well, you see, the first time he used a descriptive adjective, he said it was bat-shaped or bat-like. And he said this in the first interviews that he gave in Pendleton. And that was fine. That was published. He didn't say that they were saucer-shaped, but he did say that they were shaped like a bat. And that original article was published. I believe it would have been the June 25th. I'd have to look it up, but I think it was June 25th. But it was only published that way in the local press. Now, when that article by William Beckett, who spent 5 hours with Kenneth Arnold at a hotel trying to get all the details from him, when that article was rewritten and reduced slightly for national distribution, because that's the way news agencies worked at that time. You would publish an article and then you would make a shorter version and send it out along, through the airwaves for smaller newspapers to pick up and publish. All these different newspapers published the same story quite accurately, except for one detail. They forgot to mention the bat shape, or William Beckett omitted it in his reduced version, and that had a fantastic, enormous impact on the whole of the field, because if Arnold's only adjective, his only shape adjective was bat shaped, and that's the only word that they omitted. All the other references he made to very, very thin, he said that they were very thin like a saucer, which was an expression said at that time. These days we would say like a pancake, for example. At that time it was quite common to say saucer. Other references like that in people's minds would create a kind of a disc-shaped object. People visualized a disc from the few clues in that text. So of course he said he saw a kind of bat or crescent shape or whatever, and he told other journalists what he'd seen, and people totally ignored it, because that article was spread far and wide in a matter of hours. So immediately people came up with the funny expression, "Haha, flying saucer," and yeah, that's how it happened. And then he kept insisting that he'd seen a half moon, a crescent, whatever, a bat shape, but nobody paid any attention to him at all. And that's what caused the myth, really. It's a bit of a shame in a sense. Although, I mean, it'll be more interesting if we did have bat-shaped UFOs these days, perhaps.
Well, in I think it was June of 1947, Arnold came out with a drawing of the craft that he saw, right? And it's bat-shaped, and well, I mean, what would be described as, bat-shaped. That doesn't look like a normal standard UFO that everyone is used to, right? It looks circular and winged in the back, just like Arnold said that it was. And you would think that with Arnold coming out with a drawing of the craft that he saw and him endorsing this drawing would stop all of the disc talk and flying saucer talk, but it didn't.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, unfortunately, and that's it got out of hand. I mean, firstly, we have to remember that this is a guy it was a very simple family, and it still is a very simple family. They didn't have higher studies. They weren't. Kenneth Arnold wasn't particularly articulate, and the news spread so quickly that he had no control over anything. The first drawing he ever did was this, as far as we know. This is it, okay, and he was trying to capture the idea of the half moon. You can see it's a kind of crescent. You can see it's a kind of whatever. But that was the first drawing he ever made, which was published a couple of days later. Or at least we think he made it. It doesn't directly say that he made it. But a few years later, a very similar drawing was published that we know he made himself. So it's very likely that was his. But then when he drew it again for the American Air Force, he drew it like this. And this is when it begins to get a little bit confusing. Again, it's not a saucer, it's not a disc. But why would he draw it like that? And what I did was to show the most likely explanation. I mean, why would Arnold, an aviator, someone who followed technology very closely, draw this? And the simple reason is that it looked like a flying flapjack, which was one of the most popular super advanced aircraft that had been invented recently. I'm going to show you a picture of that if I can find one. The fact is that the flying flapjack had appeared in newspapers that very month. It was like on the cover of a magazine. So when he tried to express to the AAF that it was an advanced kind of aircraft, of course, that's what he had in his mind. The fact is, he called the object that he did see a bat, or bat-shaped, because the word bat was also being used in aviation at that time and had been used for about 30 years. The most advanced aircraft were called bat-shaped. So he didn't invent that either. He didn't just draw some animal out of thin air. He used terminology to describe what he saw. It was like the most advanced kind of aircraft at that time. I'll show you the. Yeah, this is what he drew there, and we can see that this is the flying flapjack that was in all of the newspapers and magazines at the time. Practically the same design, and
that's a military craft.
No, yeah, but I think it was built privately by a company too. I don't remember; it's in the book. But it was like a celebrity aircraft at that time, at a time when aircrafts could be celebrities, and so I think that's the reason he drew it like that. But bit by bit, as he tried to remember what he saw, because of course it was only a few seconds that he saw any of this anyway, a minute at least at the most, he realized that what he saw was crescent-shaped or bat-shaped, half-moon shaped, and that's what he told everybody. There was a point too in which, as everyone around him was calling him the flying saucer man, as everyone around him was saying, you saw flying saucers, he would have to say yes. He wouldn't say no, I didn't see flying saucers, I saw a flying bat. And because what we're talking about is like hundreds and thousands of people contacting him constantly, he ended up using the word saucer himself. So he was able to sort of maintain in his mind the fact that he saw something of a totally different shape, but call it saucer, but which is something that English language speakers do all the time anyway, which is why we talk about black boxes and they're really orange and so on and so forth. So he was caught up in the word saucer himself.
So well, I mean, who drew this image here? Arnold didn't draw that, did he? Or is that somebody else?
That was a local artist. He got this local artist. What happened was he got so incredibly tired with all of this that he ended up creating visitors cards, which are also in the book. These little cards showed anybody who was interested this actual picture here, but it was made by a local artist, so he could give this to everybody, or little reproductions of it, and say, look, this is what I saw. Okay, so don't believe anybody else. This is what I saw. And I suppose that it didn't work, because here we are all these years later discussing what shape craft he saw. But that was in 1960. The first time that you actually see him draw the bat-shaped, crescent-shaped object was for an FBI document, and it's dated August 1947. Let me show you that. It's such a long book. Next time I'll make a shorter one. There you see it's just over there, and you can see that it's the problem is the FBI document, and anyone can consult. There's a PDF online. You can see the wing, which looks a little bit like a sort of a bat wing, a batarang that Batman might have thrown. And he definitely drew this. I mean, and that is from August 1947, and that is something that cannot be argued against. This is, I mean, from the beginning, that is what he said he saw, and that is what he drew. Slightly different from the original one that he did for the Air Force. It looked like a flying flapjack, but after that, he was pretty consistent about it.
So this one came out in 1960, you said?
1960 or very, very late 1950s, yeah. When he started there,
so this was far after his original sighting then?
Well, yeah, but I mean, Yes, but it was 13 years. I mean, you might think that 1960 is way beyond 1947, but what were you doing 13 years ago? Probably nothing too different from today. It's not that far ahead. But apart from the fact that he'd been talking about this shape for years and years, I mean,
Well, it
it's
would
not as
be
if
that far ahead whenever the media frenzy happened. I mean, that's kind of late in the game to come out with this sophisticated drawing of exactly what he saw. I mean, to change people's minds about what the media and the newspapers had been claiming that he'd been seeing that would be very difficult in my mind, right? Because
we
it
have
had
to
been
remember
going on
that.
for a really long time.
But we have to remember that he was no longer the center of attention. He might have been the trigger behind the UFO craze, but he wasn't the center of attention anymore because his story wasn't that exciting. He saw 9 of them. Congratulations, he saw 9. That's great. But his story wasn't interesting. He just saw 9 of them at an enormous distance, fly past, and goodbye, and that was it. So lots of other people came up with stories about contacting aliens and landings and meeting whatever, and dead bodies and wrecks. That is what drew all the attention. So we're talking about someone who lost his position at the center of the field. So he could have said that what he'd seen was made of chocolate and looked like dog poo, and nobody would have paid any attention at all because it was just too late. In fact, he came up with all kinds of crazy theories of his own, and nobody paid any attention. All he achieved was to look like a crank. He was very, very independent. He was a very independent thinker, which is very natural. He wasn't sucked into the media frenzy. So he had his own thoughts. One of them was that maybe these were not these were not vessels at all, but actual organic creatures that he'd seen in the sky. That went completely against what other people had been saying, you know. So, but nobody paid any attention to him, so it was too late. And when he started doing that, it was too late.
Yeah, yeah, that's my point is by the time this photo came out, it was kind of too late. But that's not for the lack of him trying. I mean, I think it seems like he definitely did try to kind of get back in the spotlight of what was going on during that time with his other sightings. I mean, you said that it's in your book that he had like 9 other sightings. When did he start talking about these other sightings that he was having? How long
Almost.
after his initial sighting in 1947?
Well, because he had another sighting a few months later, which he talked about. I mean, 1948 was the second one. Oh, well, no, I mean, 1947 was the second one, but he didn't speak about that for a while. But in the 1960s, he certainly spoke about what he'd seen. He said that he'd taken photographs of them. There'd been multiple witnesses, all that kind of thing. But a lot of UFO witnesses, real ones or fake ones, do get carried away with their sightings. So there are lots and lots of writers who might have initially written a very interesting book or report, but then you check back on them 15 years later and they're saying, yeah, I was abducted at the age of 3 and I've seen UFOs in my garden. And you start to think, oh my God, now I don't know whether to believe the first thing he reported or not.
Right.
But I think Arnold's a very good example of someone who definitely saw something, who reported something very honestly, but later on just got slightly paranoid about lights in the sky and so on. It's a bit like Whitley Strieber, who, you know, his first book, Communion, did really well, but then you pick up his later books and he goes to this 1,000,000-year-old school on another planet and time travels, and and you start thinking, oh, okay, right, I think I should stop reading his books from this point onwards.
It's because they have to one up themselves every single time. It's like creating a sequel to a movie. If you're not going to create, it's like Hollywood. If you're going to make a sequel to a movie, you got to make the sequel bigger, better, and badder than the first one. That's how I relate it. It's the exact same type of thing, and the story snowball into something that it never really was, and that's from the influence of everybody else and their stories, and then they jump on the UFO train, and then it turns into this big, huge, gigantic fairy tale story that has no basis in reality.
Yeah, you see that in everything. You see that in crop circles. It started off as very simple circles and then ended up being ridiculous, gigantic works of art in fields. You see that in the 1896, 1897 airship wave, where firstly people just reported airships that had human inventors behind them. I mean, they were fake stories in general, but anyway, but you could see how they work. They were based on inventors and engineers who really existed, and these plans really existed, and ended up being extremely extravagant tales of crashed airships with tentacled aliens and and whatever. This is the way it works. It just goes up and up and up. It escalates. And it's a bit sad when it happens to someone who genuinely saw something. But yeah, I mean, we can't imagine the world he was caught up in because, of course, it didn't exist in 1947. If you saw something today, you wouldn't get caught up in it in the same way. In 1947, you were the first, you were the top, you were the one, and no one had even heard of any of this. Well, they had, and that's another part of my studies, but not on the same scale.
I like that you brought up crop circles right there, because I've been waiting to play this video of this gentleman that's doing this. It's sand. He's doing it in sand, right? But it's very sophisticated, and it gets very wild with geometrical patterns here as he goes along. And my point of like crop circles is like, well, if they can do this on sand, they can make this a very sophisticated.
This is a book I brought out in Spanish a while ago, and it's about crop circles. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the guy who's walking around there is probably Julian Richardson, who I interviewed for the book, and he's one of the most important land artists. They're not really crop circle makers anymore. They're land artists. And
look at the sophistication of, obviously, again, it's on sand, but the sophistication of that, you just pick that up and you take that to, a cornfield, and you get the exact same thing. It's almost identical to crop circles.
Well, one of the things about crop circles a decade or two ago now was the presence of a kind of weird symbol that you'd find next to a lot of the crop circles. It looks like a sort of weird key thing like that with the circle in the middle. And you could see the same symbol on so many different crop circle layouts over the decades. It just seemed like an obvious sign that they were real. And anyway, I interviewed this guy, Julian Richardson, and it was fascinating because, of course, this symbol here is simply Friends of Julian. That's all it is. And it's just an F, an O, and a J. And it was like a secret symbol that groups related to him would add to their crop circles. And I've seen so many videos and articles, conferences, in which someone's trying to speculate about the meaning of that, the hidden meaning of this symbol. It's just Friends of Julian. So yeah, and I don't think I'll publish this book in English anytime soon, but it's available in Spanish if anyone wants it.
Yeah, it's just wild how these stories and excuse me, Still getting over a little healing here. It's wild how these stories get regurgitated and then they take on a different form, and then other people get involved, and then it turns into something that's completely ridiculous and like made up. I mean, the Arnold's second story was what was the second sighting? He said that he saw, I think it was a cluster of like 20 to 25 brass collared objects or something like that, and he
Yeah,
related them to looking
it's
like ducks. He said that they look like ducks, and they
yeah.
appeared to be round and rough on the top, and he said that they flew in like a cluster and more like
Later, he
blackbirds than
interviewed.
ducks, right? And according to Arnold, he said that they weren't ducks and they weren't birds, but whenever you use a descriptor of, and I understand what some people are trying to do, especially some of these early people, they try and relate the object that they saw to things that people can recognize, just like the
That's
flying
correct.
saucer narrative. But whenever you say something looks like ducks, then it's like, oh well, it was probably ducks. You
I
know,
mean, they could have
that's
made so many jokes about the quack being, in the sky watching the ducks. Or I don't know. They could have made, But the fact is that when he landed, he interviewed people who'd been on the ground at that time around that area and said, "Did you see what I saw? These duck-like objects?" And they said, "Yeah, we saw those ducks," which is and I don't know. And then over time, that sort of metamorphoses into discs. So at first he says they look like ducks, and then he says they look like discs. But I mean, but then of course he also denied ever seeing disc-like objects. It's extremely confusing when you look through the story of Kenneth Arnold and the book. I think it's the first time anyone's ever gone through the whole chronology of his claims. You can see that there's a point of no return for him. He just loses it. I mean, he was a very sincere, very good-natured witness, but there's a point in which he doesn't know what to think anymore. He was really confused. I mean, once you reach the conclusion that they're probably organic beings and not machines, the UFOs, then suddenly you can't believe that they're carrying people inside anymore, or aliens, because they wouldn't be. And then you would discard all of the stories about a crew of aliens who come out of the ship. And yeah, it was a very complex time for him. And then, of course, he also had his own personal views about the afterlife, and he wasn't a very spiritual person. But by the end of this, his beliefs included that flying saucers were probably related to messengers from the next world who would sort of guide us after death or whatever. I don't know. This is basically what he thought in the end. And I mean,
yeah, he wanted to relate it to like the Bible and the book of Ezekiel and like all these different things, like a lot of people. He was probably one of the first people to do that, and later came on what's his name, the guy
he wrote a
uh,
book about this.
yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't the first person to do it. He wasn't even the first person during the flying saucer age, and decades and decades before Arnold, they had already associated Ezekiel with possible aliens and otherworldly things, and people had actually tried to build airships based on Ezekiel's description in the Bible, and that was 50 years before Kenneth Arnold. And in my first book, Alien Artifacts, I show how people use this story too. It's a very old idea, but by comparing what he saw to what the prophet Ezekiel saw, it sort of turned him into a prophet, or at least a very important person at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had some sort of delusions of grandeur at that point, and people lapped it up because in the world of UFOs, no one really knows what's happening, if anything at all, which means that anyone can be a leader of a group of thinkers or whatever. And I think he saw himself like that.
It's the only thing that you can be an expert on and not have a degree.
That's right. It's interesting. I mean, even in ornithology, you get different species of birds, but I don't think you'll find the same flying saucer twice in photos, and you don't see the same UFO twice normally. It's a weird thing. It's this sort of cognitive dissonance in which people are able to think that it's all part of the same phenomenon, whereas in fact everyone's describing something totally different. And even when they describe an alien, they're always different, and they have different messages and different motivations. And you look back and you just see how every decade had its favorite alien type. And you can how do you become an expert in ufology in that sense, or in anything? If you were looking at stones, minerals, if you never saw the same mineral twice, I mean, what could you possibly do with that? Or vegetables or animals or whatever. Yeah, it's a crazy old field. So that's why we spend most of our time studying ufologists instead of studying UFOs.
Yes, I agree. And there's something else that I wanted to talk to you about that I was mentioning to you before we started the show here today. Was Kenneth Arnold was connected with this guy named Samuel Eden Thompson. And there's no photos of Samuel Eden Thompson, but supposedly this gentleman was one of the very first abductees. Some people would call it contactees. But he claimed that on the evening of March 28th, 1950, he was driving home in Washington. He came across a large flying saucer in the woods. The saucer claimed to be about 80 feet to 30 feet tall. Two naked, deeply tanned children, human in form, were playing near the craft's entrance. Thompson claimed that he had approached to within about 50 feet of the saucer, which emitted a strong sunlight heat. Several naked adults, humanoid, attractive, and also deeply tanned, then appeared at the craft's door. After realizing Thompson meant them no harm, they beckoned him closer to the crew, consisted of around 20 adults and 25 children. And Thompson claimed to have spent the next 40 hours with the humanoids, so roughly close to 3 days, a couple of days. They claimed that they were from Venus. He learned and that they had stopped at Earth despite the fact that other Venetian saucers had been shot down by Earth-based military forces. The Venetians said that all of Earth's problems stemmed from astrology. Humans were born under different star signs, while Venetians were all born under the sign of Venus, as was Thompson. The Venetians further claimed that Thompson that they were vegetarian as they never grew ill. Thompson also claimed that the Venetians were naive like children. They did not know who built their flying saucers and seemed to possess little to no curiosity. Thompson claimed that he was the first of many earthlings who would meet the Venetians, and after humanity had seen the wisdom of the Venetians' ways, Jesus Christ would return in 10,000 AD. Holy crap, Chris, we got a long time before Jesus comes back. Holy shit. Thompson claimed that he had stayed on the spaceship until March 30th, 1950. He tried to photograph the spaceship, he claimed, but the object was too bright to appear on film and more than a blob of light. He could see the Venetians at any time that he wanted. So all he had to do was contact the Venetians. Just showed up one time, and then now he can just see them whenever. They enabled his telepathic psychic abilities. So after this, I guess Kenneth Arnold, which his sighting was in 1947, and then Samuel Eden Thompson was in 1950. Kenneth Arnold interviewed Thompson, as it says right here, And apparently Arnold did not take or believe his story was literally true, but neither could he accept that poorly educated, seemingly Seer Thompson was a blatant liar or a prankster. Arnold speculated that Thompson might have had a psychic experience. And
Mhm.
I just thought that this story was very interesting because no one really knows anything about Samuel Eaton Thompson. They don't talk about him because very few people even know that he existed. But you were
Right.
telling me that contactees and abductees have been happening way earlier than this. So give us some stories and some examples of some of the earliest
Well,
contactees or
well, I mean, the first book that I call it my first book because it's the first book in a series, which is basically called the Alien Artifact Project. I invented that years ago before lots of other books were called Alien Artifacts. But anyway, whatever. And then I brought out this one, which is the first one, and it's done really well, and it's had like 100% good reviews and whatever. It's really, really well received. But the point is, in this book, for the first time, I've shown the origins of the belief in alien visitation, going back to the first ever cases. I start off by talking about how people believed in a plurality of inhabited worlds, and then how religion picked that up pretty quickly, how it became an important topic in theology to discuss whether Jesus Christ only came to this planet, which wouldn't make sense in an infinite universe, or at least in a universe full of planets. So did he die on every other planet too? Did he take human form everywhere he went? These were big theological questions for a very long time. So
what was the
once
really quickly what was the conclusion of that? What did you find out about that? Because that's been a long held question of mine as well. Like, if Jesus really did exist, then what, do other planets also believe in Jesus? Would Jesus go to all? If we're taking the stance that the universe is highly inhabited and that there are other beings on other planets, like if we were to pick up and go to a distant far planet, a distant far galaxy, and there was beings that lived on that planet, like physical beings, would they also have heard of Jesus, or is it just singular to planet Earth?
well, my opinion about that is probably irrelevant, but I doubt very much they would have heard of Christianity for any number of reasons. But the point is that theologians Vatican theologians reach the conclusion that the universe is infinitely large. This was an idea that originally seemed anti-religious because God doesn't mention the existence of other planets in the Bible. But then it was decided in the year 1377 that we can't say that if God wanted to move planet Earth, for example, in one direction or another, we can't say he cannot do it because he's God. He can do whatever he wants. So, of course, if he wanted to move the world in any direction, he can. But logically, if he can move the world in any direction, there must be space for it to go, like you're moving a fridge in the kitchen. You just need to be able to wiggle it out and put it somewhere else. And so they reached the conclusion that that the universe must be extremely large, and much larger than we expected. And God wouldn't have wasted his time on making only one inhabited planet, and therefore there are probably thousands, if not an infinite number of inhabited planets in the universe, which is what the ancient Greeks had already decided in a school of thought called atomism. Anyway, then this became a topic of hot debate among theologians, the clergy, Vatican people for centuries. So there were whole books and treatises devoted to the topic of extraterrestrials in the universe at 700, 800 years ago. And then there wasn't there wasn't a consensus on it. But what happened was that by the 16th, 17th century, everybody basically believed it was highly likely that there were aliens in the universe. Where is another matter, of course. The moon was an obvious choice. Nobody yet really talked about Mars. But yeah, people even talked about aliens in the sun. A lot of people in the 19th century speculated about extraterrestrial life on the sun. And then around the 18th century, 1758 to be precise, that's when we get Emanuel Swedenborg, who was the first real contactee. And he was an extremely intelligent man with multiple doctorates and a very important position in the government in Sweden, an amazing inventor. And he said that he'd contacted aliens throughout the universe, and particularly in our solar system. He talked to them on a regular basis. He exchanged ideas with them, particularly the Mercurians, very similar to our Greys in the sense that they were telepathic. He didn't use the word telepathy; it didn't exist in 1758, but he talked about how they would enter his mind and read his thoughts like a sort of Rolodex of images or whatever. And yeah, he established contact with the universe. His books are still believed in. There's still a Swedenborg Institute, or 3, I believe, in the United States. There are people who still follow him, but he started it. And then the books that he wrote one about Earths in the universe, it was called. This book was read by Joseph Smith of the Mormons. It was read by a lot of other religious leaders who then adapted aliens into their own religious worldview. And then suddenly you have a situation in which you have 3 or 4 religions in the mid-19th century, which were highly receptive to stories about aliens. And so you find in lots of Mormon books stories and speculation about aliens. Then, of course, this evolved into stories about ancient aliens, because it was believed for quite a long period in the 19th century that our ancestors came from outer space, literally, and that humanity had originated on another planet. This was a theory. I don't even remember your question, but I'm just going to carry on till I end this idea, I suppose. In 1823, a guy called Francois Chabrier published this book, and it has taken me 19 years to get this book, and then finally I received it at Christmas. And in this book here from 1823, which I'm gonna publish something about this very soon, and probably the whole book. He said that a planet exploded in our solar system in ancient times. The people from that planet came here, sort of Superman fashion, brought with them all kinds of tools and advanced civilization and whatever, which explains parts and I mean, he gets into pyramids, and then the people who copied him started talking about Easter Island statues, pyramids, and all kinds of stuff. So it was a whole von Daniken universe more than 100 years before von Daniken.
Yeah, so von Daniken was who I was thinking about earlier that talked about the Book of Ezekiel and all that. Oh, yeah, the regurgitation is obviously prevalent. When was that book that you're holding? When was that written?
201 years ago. Wow. 1823. Wow. 1823. It wasn't cheap. In any case, but I've been looking for it for 20 years, and it's in French, by the way, so I have to translate it. the fact is that by von Daniken's time, people had already believed in ancient aliens and humanity's origin in the stars and so on and so forth for 150 years, and it was incredibly popular. Even when Madame Blavatsky, the leader of Theosophy, who had a big impact on later UFO writers, when she wrote a little bit about it at the end of the 19th century, it was already old hat. It had been around for 60 years, which is a huge amount of time. So, yeah, contactees were not strange in that period. Then anyone involved in spiritualism, which was a massive, massive movement, bigger than UFOs, and in the 19th century, from around the middle, the 1840s onwards, it was so huge. We're talking about millions and millions and millions and millions. Like there are 15 million Mormons in the world, and it was probably a similar number. And many of these people believed that they were in contact with aliens, because again, this escalated in the sense that at the beginning they were talking to your granddad who died last year and whatever. But then they had to sort of better each other, and that there was a point in which they adopted this book by Emanuel Swedenborg from 1758. They started creating a kind of mythology around this. So in spiritualism, they were contacting aliens. They had long conversations with people on Jupiter and that kind of thing. So you have that going on. Then at the beginning of the 20th century, speaking to aliens was so incredibly common that it manifested a lot in paranoias, illnesses, mental illnesses, and so on. I have a whole book lined up for that in the future too. There's an interesting case, for example, from 1911, a guy called Gus Avery, who was found one day by the police, I remember, our neighbors, is standing in the middle of a stream with his mother's shawl in his hands and covered in blood. And so they went up to him and said, "What's going on?" And he took them back to the house and explained. They found the mother, her whole body opened up like this with her guts hanging out, sitting on a chair, I imagine. He'd slashed her body open with a broken bottle and said, "Well, the thing is, I've been receiving telepathic communication from the Martians who've been flying over our house for quite some time. And they told me that the only possible way for us to go into the sky with them and be taken away on their airships to Mars is if I take the unborn child out of my mother's womb." And so I did, he said. The trouble was his mother was quite elderly, so you can imagine that she didn't have any kind of unborn child in her womb. And he was obviously sent off to a psychiatric hospital and so on and so forth. So, I mean, that in a sense is contacteeism, because he believed that he was acting in accordance with the instructions given to him by Martians floating over his house in airships. But then we find exactly the same thing constantly. And because I knew we were going to talk about this subject, there's a fascinating book. If anyone ever sees a copy of this, it took me a while to get one and I lost and I bought another one. And it's called No One May Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again. And it's Letters to Mount Wilson Observatory, 1915 to 1935. And you might think, all right, letters to an observatory, why do I care? But the very first chapter in this book is are the letters from Alice May Williams to the observatory, written around the year 1920. And she's talking about her constant contact with Martians and their spaceships, or aliens in general, about how she's constantly seeing them and they visit her and everything. And we're talking about the 1920s contactee. And so when Arnold came along, to be honest, it was pretty old hat, that, this idea of being in touch with the aliens. And there's so many more cases that I'm going to bring out Alien Artifacts 2 in a couple of months. Alien Artifacts 1, as I said, has done quite well, and it's got the whole story in there, if anyone's interested.
I got a good title for that book that you're going to write, and you can use it if you want, but you have to pay me royalties. No, I'm just joking. But I think that it's a great title. Aliens made me do it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Aliens made me do it. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, that would be an amazing book. The mental illness throughout the community is really staggering. It really is. And do you think that with that gentleman that killed his mother to be abducted by the aliens or go into the sky, do you think that was like an excuse, like some kind of wacky excuse so that he wouldn't?
I think it was mercury poisoning. He was taking medicine at the time. But what I do in this book that I'm trying to write and will eventually, I've got all the information, is that it doesn't really matter what's behind it. The fact is, if you're having a hallucination about anything, it must be because somewhere inside your brain, you can visualize it. You have some, for example, if you have a hallucination of the Virgin Mary, it's because the Virgin Mary exists to you. You must have heard of the Virgin Mary at some point, whether you believe in it or not. If people, and there are a lot of people hallucinating aliens, alien persecution, abduction, people who said they just escaped from the aliens and so on and so forth, it's because by then, and we're talking about the 1860s onwards, people were already speculating about alien visitation, and we're talking about an amazing cross-section of society, because a lot of the people who were sent to hospital or even prison for being mad, for being crazy, were just like grocers and housewives and whatever, which is fascinating. It's like a window into their inner world, and that's where the aliens are. You can take all of this and interpret modern culture with it, or I mean, there's so much you can do with this, which is one of the reasons why I haven't published it yet, because I just don't know where to take it. But I will do something with it. I think I'm going to call it Inner Voices or something, because I'm going to add other kinds of hallucinations. There's lots of amazing things. A guy who goes to the doctors, I think in 1910, around that time, saying that he'd just escaped from, I think, the British Museum. He was actually a mummy, he said. He'd just come out of a sarcophagus. And so there's so much of it. There's just it's unbelievable.
How much of this do you think can be, for this subject with the mental illness factor, how much of this do you think can be attributed to the drugs?
I think a lot of it was because, okay, it's impossible to say a lot of it because there aren't enough records to go on. Some of it would be because medicine at that time was made of mercury and poisonous elements and sold to you as a kind of snake oil or whatever, and you would take it. I imagine there was some drug taking going on, and there were lots of people who truly suffered from mental illnesses. So and no one knew what to do with that. And yeah, but the fact is that if they were influenced in such a way to believe that men from Jupiter were chasing them down the street with electric guns, which is another one of the stories, it must be because they'd read about it, heard about it, people talked about this kind of thing at the time. So
yeah, Stanley, I'm going to be talking about human and animal mutilation on my show on Thursday with Walter Bosley and Trey Hudson. So tune in for that one. No, what I kind of meant by him just kind of making this up, because we know that this it's prevalent with serial killers. They'll just make things up as an excuse to try and get off on like an insanity plea. I mean, that's like a huge thing that they've done for a really long time. Very few of them actually get insanity pleas, but I was just curious if it could have been,
In a,
maybe he
in a period,
murdered his mother, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, the aliens made me do it." It seems like something that.
in a period when you could suffer the death penalty for being insane too, or at least be locked up forever for being insane, you wouldn't have gone with "I was insane." It wouldn't have helped. People were being locked up and thrown into jail forever because they were insane. So.
That makes sense. And a lot of the insane asylums in the early 90s and in the mid 90s, like you could just go and drop off your family member to one of these insane asylums and be like, "Oh, she's crazy," and then they would just take her.
Yeah,
it's wild. Some of the entries, I've read some of the entry logs in some of the insane asylums, previous insane asylums in the United States, and some of them is like really wacky. Like there was one dude that got put in an insane asylum for excessive masturbation.
Okay.
Like just wild. It's just wild stuff. You could basically just take a family member there and just drop them off and make up some kind of nonsense, and they would take them. And they'd probably never see him again, which I think is a really good way for a lot of men to get rid of their wives.
Dr. Kellogg invented cornflakes to stop people from masturbating. So that's the story of Kellogg.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm. So everyone eating, young teenagers eating their cornflakes in the morning. I don't think it had the impact that he expected it would. But anyway.
Wow. All right, Chris. Thanks so much for coming on, brother. Really appreciate it. It was an amazing conversation. Can you let people, I'm going to bring up your book one more time here so people can get it. They can get it on Amazon Prime, correct?
Yeah, it's a fun book. If someone wants to steal it, buy it, send it back to Amazon after reading it, I do not care. I don't make a living off these things. It's a lot of fun, really, and it really challenges people to think a lot about this. If you're skeptical about this, it's really good as a kind of as ammunition. And if you believe in flying saucer reality or UFO reality, it's a really good test. I don't deny UFOs exist as a concept. But you need to know the facts behind all of this, and that's what I'm working on. I'm trying to get all this out after so many years of collecting it. That's the idea. And this particular book was fun. I was given this plaque thing because this is the Spanish version. I always do a Spanish version, English version, and the reason is at the beginning of the book, the introduction, I talk about a bar I walked into called the Flying Saucers, or Los Platillos Volantes, in a town called Cadiz, which is by the sea, and in 1955. There were two rival groups during the carnivals. People still compete to this day with songs to have the best songs and whatever, the best costumes. And one of them was called the Martians, and the other one was called the Bichitos de Luz, or the little light bugs. And the light bugs invented a song to mock the Martians, saying, "Oh, these guys, they're in their flying saucers, flying about all the time." And the bar was called the Flying Saucers in their honor. And what I thought was amazing was that just 8 years after a single man saw what he didn't even call himself flying saucers in the middle of the United States, a tiny bar in a tiny town in Spain, so far away, could have changed the name of their bar to correspond with that sighting of that man. That was the massive impact that flying saucers had, which is why I mention it in the first chapter. And I went there and they gave me a plaque and I did a little conference for them and whatever. So yeah, there's a lot in this book, actually. And as I said, I think it's one of the first books that might change an entry in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a nice little honor, I suppose.
Really quick before I let you go, when did the name change from flying saucer to UFO?
I think it was about 1956, was it, around that time? Yeah, the sort of mid-50s. And simply because the military was using, or the Air Force was using, the term UFO. It's not my specialization, the 1950s. It's take me back to the 1850s. I'll give you a story or two. But it was around that time. And the modern term UAP, you can actually find it in the 1960s and before too, in some documents and in newspapers. So that's not exactly new either. I don't know. These things sort of come into fashion, and probably driven by politics and aimed to make things sound more official or something, But
well, and then also to kind of get rid of anything that really happened in the past too, because if you change the name, then it makes it difficult to research anything that happened before the name change. That's very. I think that's what's going on. And it's also really interesting. I meant to comment on this earlier, how the military kind of took over trap shooting from the public before World War II. And then it kind of fell out of favor within the public, and the military was doing it. And then whenever it got switched to, flying saucers, but in a different context than what people claim that Arnold had saw, it kind of seems like a repeating thing, because now we have ufology and in the grips of pretty much the military and the intelligence community. It's like they've taken it back over again, if that makes sense. It's like it's a repeating thing.
What I'm writing now, because I'm about to publish the letters of Charles Fort in a separate book, probably next week if I can. And one of his letters is interesting. Charles Fort wrote some amazing things in the 1920s. People are not aware at all, even if they've read his books, of the kind of things that he was saying. One of the things that he believed was that humans were sort of kept alive as an energy source for the aliens, and that's why they didn't land on Earth openly, which is so Matrix. It's just amazing. It's the Matrix. It's Neo. We're kept alive as energy sources. But there is a point, and that's in the book that I'll be publishing. But there's a point in which he says that he feels that at any moment something's going to happen, something's coming that's going to change our perspective. And when we'll realize that our friends, our brothers in space are there, and so on. And that feeling that something's about to happen has existed throughout ufology in the 1970s with Donald Keyhoe and before 1970s. The idea that the government's about to release something. It never does. The 1980s, exactly the same. Right now, it's the same. The government's about to release something. We're about to enter a new age. And one thing that I wrote, what I write in this book when I'm commenting on the letters, is that, well, the first news article that I have about this feeling that something's going to change and we're going to be in contact with the aliens, published in 1883. It says something like imminently, which is what they say today. And then in 1895, it's written in a newspaper, a report saying, look, I'm sure that in the next 10 years, the Martians are going to land openly in their airships, and that'll bring in a new age. 1895, and people were still saying the same thing 100 years later, and as early as recently as this morning.
That's right, and it never happens, and it's never going to happen based off of the past. That's it's wild. Your research is unbelievable. You're putting a lot of things together without just outright saying it. I know what you're, the reason why you're doing that, because you don't want to disenfranchise a whole group of people. But I understand what you're saying, and I think other people. Yeah, that's right. You don't want to alienate them, but Yeah, my friend, it was great talking with you. Really appreciate your time this evening. Always a fascinating conversation. Would love to have you back on anytime. Is there any other place that you would like to direct people to other than to purchase your book on Amazon? Any social medias that you would like people to check out or anything?
No, I don't do anything on social media really. I just send some stupid joke every now and again on Facebook to show people I'm still alive, and that is absolutely all I do. I don't do interviews, generally speaking. I like talking to you. That's nice, but yeah, I sort of don't do very much. I don't feel the need, and I don't live off this. It's not something I try to make money on. I just want people to see, you know, what the truth is behind this, or at least what the facts are. You know, it's there's so much disinformation out there. That's the thing. So this year I'm going to publish Charles Fort's letters, which people are going to like. Pretty amazing stuff in there. I'm going to do a definitive guide to how the ancient astronaut theory was invented 201 years ago. I'm going to publish a series of books called Incredible Stories, full of Fortean tales of mystery and whatever, which are going to be quite interesting with my notes and comments in them and that kind of thing. And I've also got another book coming out about one of the first landing close encounter things from 1868 in Australia. I want to get that out soon. I got lots of things going on. So yeah.
Well, I would love to have you back on anytime you come on with something new, because I think it's important for people to get a refresher on this stuff, because there's new people coming in all the time, and it's always nice to, talk about these things, because like you said, it's important for people to know the history of this stuff, because I feel like the history is just completely looked over, and people just regurgitate what they hear from one person saying to the next person, and then it becomes a part of their reality and a part of their belief structure. When you look back at a lot of this stuff, it's a lot of fairy tales and a lot of nonsense and a lot of things that have been compounded upon and regurgitated based off of previous people, as you have brought up several times during this show. But thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate your time. Love to have you back on anytime in the future. Whenever your next book comes out, we'll grab a copy of that and read it. And I recommend anybody to check out this his book, Saucers, Tracing the Origins of Disc-Shaped UFOs. Really worth it. And it gives you a detailed history of, even goes back into like ancient times and what people were seeing back then in the sky. It's an incredible research piece. I highly recommend it. And thanks for everyone for being here. Good to see you, Nina, Susie, Lynn, Jim. Got here late, brother. It's okay. We're getting ready to close out right now, but go back and rewatch. Sam, good to see you. Stanley, and everyone else that had contributed in the chat that I did not get to shout out. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. All right, see you guys next time. Chris, stay with me, brother.